Hello, fellow risk takers, and welcome to my worst investment ever. Stories of loss to keep you winning. In our community, we know that to win in investing, you must take risk, but to win big, you've got to reduce it. To join our community, go to myworstinvestmentever.com and receive these 5 free benefits. First, you get the risk reduction checklist I have created from the lessons I've learned from all my guests. Second, you get my weekly email to help you increase your investment return. Third, you get a 25% discount on all A Stotts Academy courses. Fourth, you get access to our Facebook community to get to know guests and fellow listeners. And finally, you get my curated list of the top 10 episodes. Fellow risk takers, this is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stotts from A Stotts Academy, and I'm here with featured guest David Allen. David, are you ready to rock?
Why not, Andrew? Sure.
Well, I want to introduce you to the audience and let me tell them one of the world's most influential thinkers on productivity. David's 35 years experience as a management consultant and executive coach have earned him worldwide recognition. His best-selling book, the groundbreaking Getting Things Done: The Art of Stress-Free Productivity, has sold millions and has been published in 30 languages, and the GTD methodology it describes has become a global phenomenon, being taught by training companies in more than 90 countries. David has his company and his partners are dedicated to teaching people how to stay relaxed and productive in our fast paced world. David, take a minute and fill further tidbits about your life.
35 jobs by the time I was 35. Didn't know what the heck I was going to do when I grew up. Uh, just needed to pay the rent and wound up bouncing around and ultimately discovered I was pretty good at being a number two guy. So I helped a lot of friends with their businesses. I just go in and look around and say, how much easier can we make this? Now they call that process improvement. I was just lazy. How much earlier can we get out of here?
Mm.
What we're doing. And so then I discovered they actually pay people. I'd fix it and they get bored and then go find another job. Then I discovered they pay people to do that. They call them something consultant. When couldn't spell it, now I are one. So 1982, hung up my shingle, Allen Associates, and I started to just say, okay, can I sell myself on a project by project basis? And also, I like being clear. I like being not distracted. I like being free of stuff. So I found a lot of techniques that work for me, turned around and use those with my clients to help them get more control, relaxation, focus, etc. And it all worked. Like, wow, well, that's cool. So that kind of became the core of a lot of what I was consulting and working with people then. And then some big, corporate head of HR, in a big corporation saw what I was doing and said, gee, David, we need that in our whole company. Can you design some training around that so you can reach a lot of people with this stuff instead of one-on-one? So I did, and it worked. And that was highly successful. Lockheed, 1983, 84. And that sort of threw me into the corporate training world. Who'd have thought? It's like, what? That was, and I'm not particularly, Andrew, I'm not particularly entrepreneurial or even aspirational in that regard. I'm really more an educator than anything else and a researcher. Oh,
Mm.
what is it that allows us to stay clear and focused, in the world? And then just turned out that what I uncovered hit a nerve out there. And it took me 20 years to figure out what I'd figured out, and that it was bulletproof, and then nobody else seemed to have done it. That's when I wrote the book, Getting Things Done. So there's a short version of a very
Yeah.
long story.
I'm kind of curious because if I was just rereading the book and your latest edition, which I believe was 2015,
Yeah.
and you know this is no small feat. Though your methodology is simple and all that, you've definitely put in a lot of time into it. As I read that, I really feel that. And my question to you is like, um, like when was the time when it all kind of came together? Like this is because I see when I look at you from the book and what I've learned, it's really kind of unifying, like nothing left behind. Everything is in there, and that's not an easy feat. There's a lot of times that you can't connect this one with that one, or just kind of curious about that time when it started to really all come together.
Yeah. Don't know. I didn't wake up one morning with all this. To me, it was a long number of years of string of epiphanettes. Oh, there's something. Oh, that's a cool thing. That's a cool thing. And then at some point, it began to merge or unfold as an intact methodology.
Mm.
But I can't tell you exactly when that was. It was a developmental process. And a lot of it had to do with this thousands of hours I spent one-on-one desk side with some of the best and brightest people you'd ever meet, working this methodology with them, because we do training in their company, and then the senior people would want me to come sit desk side with them and help them implement what this was. And
So you were like going back home and thinking, okay, I need to modify this a little bit and make this that wasn't so clear.
no,
And
no, it was really more. Every time I did it, I learned something.
mm,
I still do. If,
yeah,
if I'm still coaching anybody, I still learn something. Wow, that's a whole different way to think about that I hadn't said that way before. So it was really a long developmental process, really, for myself.
right.
At some point, I said, okay, I guess I know enough about it and trusted enough to write the manual, and that's when I wrote the book.
And one last thing from my side is just that I recently went through all the books I could find on time management and goal setting and all that stuff. And, there's a long lineage of this topic. And when I get to your book in that kind of fun lecture that I do, it's interesting that nobody before you kind of connected into this unifying theory. Some people were interested in the way you set a goal, and some people were interested in the way you complete your tasks, and others were interested in the way you set a vision of what you want. But I'm just curious, why do you think that some of these very brilliant people didn't put it all together like you did?
Beats me.
Yeah.
I have no idea. It was as much a surprise to me as anybody else.
Yeah.
As I said, I thought that a lot more sophisticated people making a lot more money than I'd ever make in my lifetime would have already figured this out. Turned out just the opposite. It turns out that those people were the most interested in what I'd uncovered.
Yeah, well, that's
It's the most productive people that are most interested in what I do, which is
mm,
fascinating, because they already know the value of system. They already know the value of organization. They already know the value of focus. That's how they got to where they are.
yep.
The problem is they're up to here, and
Mm,
their own systematic processes haven't kept up with their own aspirations and visions, and so they've overrun themselves. And so
right.
they know if they had more room, they could create more cool stuff.
Yep.
And so, what I developed was something that gave more room.
Yep.
So
Well,
could have fooled me.
yeah. Well, for the listeners out there, I highly recommend you get the book if you haven't gotten the book and you learn about it. I know that there's also a workbook I think I saw. I was looking at the bookstore and
Yeah.
I was kind of debating whether to get the workbook or the book, and I decided to go back to the
Well,
book.
well, Andrew, come on. The book itself is a little daunting. It is 25 years of my career that I've just packaged into a manual in case I got run over by a bus. I said at some point,
Mm,
somebody might figure this out. But in case I get run over by the bus, at least somebody could pick up the book and learn what I'd learned in my 25 or 30 years, of doing this kind of work. And so that's kind of why I wrote it. I had high uh, uh, anticipation, but no expectation. I had no idea whether the book would be successful or not. Even back then, it was quite a noisy space out there, time management and personal organization and all that stuff.
yeah.
In the 2001 when the first edition came out, and I had no idea that it would
Mm,
hit a nerve, and it turns out it did.
it did.
So,
It
yeah,
did. So, last thing on that is just that for the listeners out there that haven't had the book and they may not be able to go get it right away, and they're sitting at their home in Bangladesh or in Australia or in the U.S. or in, and what would be like kind of the one thing, one or two things that you would give them advice that do this, think this way, from your own
yeah,
experience, what would you say is the kind of the
sure.
one or two things that would be valuable for
Yeah.
them?
Stop using your head as your office. It's a crappy office. Your brain did not evolve to remember, remind, prioritize, and manage relationships between more than four things. Otherwise, you'll suboptimize your ability to take a test or think. That's now new cognitive science data that's been proven in the last 10 years. I discovered that on the street 35 years ago. So basically, stop using your head, get everything out of your head, and then on some regular basis, do some sort of reflection or review of the whole gestalt of all your commitments.
Mm,
That,
it's simple.
it's like simple. It's a kind of a big duh, but boy, people just don't have the time and don't take the time to do what I just said. They think I can keep it in my head, that works. And they think I don't need to review all my stuff. I'm too busy.
There it is. Well, I appreciate that. Well, now it's time to share your worst investment ever. And since no one ever goes into their worst investment thinking it will be, tell us a bit about the circumstances leading up to it, and then tell us your story.
I was writing my third book, Making It All Work, Winning at the Game of Work and the Business of Life. And if anybody's ever written a book, believe me, it's funny. I could become an alcoholic writing a book about stress-free productivity, just trying to put it all together. Anyway, so I was trying to write a book at the time, and our work. I never done any marketing or sales, so all we did was pick up the phone. It was all referral-based stuff. I had no idea what marketing meant, or whatever. And by that time, I had a group of almost 50 people just because of trying to keep up with client demand in terms of training and coaching that we were doing. And I said, I'm up to here. I need some help. And I didn't quite frankly know how to run a company. I'm not a really good manager. I'm not the best player for that play. I'm too impatient and so I said, okay, I need to find somebody to help, who can take the reins, and particularly with a sales and marketing background, because that seemed to be what we needed at the time. So bottom line, I hired the wrong guy. So it looked good. I was pressed up against the wall. He had a great resume. He was close by, seemed to be kind of right guy to do it, and had to make a quick decision because he had another offer, for him to come in. And he said, David, come on, you got to decide quick, whatever, or I'm going to take the other offer. And so I decided quick. And I did not do enough sufficient due diligence to find out whether the guy was really the right guy or not. And that took 3 years and was very expensive and hard to deal with in terms of it just didn't match the DNA of our culture. And I didn't know that. And I didn't take the time to figure that out, and wasn't sophisticated enough to know that. And also, it was more like giving up the job. Look, instead of trying to learn how to do this myself, let me go find somebody who seems to already know how to do it. And so I sort of gave up my own accountability to figure it out. How do you run a company? How do you manage all that? So kind of a short version of a long story, but
And
that was it.
when was it that you kind of came to the realization that, okay, this really isn't going to work?
He was doing, he was making side deals under the table with salespeople and other things like that. He was, and it was not, there was a lack of transparency,
Right.
and a lack of, he was just, working his shtick, and that shtick did not match with the DNA of our culture. It wasn't
Yeah.
how we operated. And so to start to recognize that, and then recognize, just didn't work. So, yeah,
So
that's when.
how would you describe the lessons that you learned from that?
Don't be pressured to make decisions because of a time pressure. It's funny because sometimes you have to. You've got a time pressure. You've got a thing to do. You have to make that decision. Now, I'm involved in, for 10 years, we've been doing something called holocracy, and we're sort of running our company as a self-organizing organization. And one of the principles is basically avoid decisions to the last responsible moment, which is a pregnant statement. Avoid decisions to the last responsible moment. So don't jump the gun. And those are the biggest mistakes that I've made, is jumping the gun simply because I felt I was pressured to have to make those decisions, when in truth I wasn't. And I was just avoiding, stepping up to the plate and growing up myself in terms of what I needed to learn,
Right.
to manage things.
And for the people that don't know what a holocracy is, can you just describe, besides obviously that statement is one about decisions, but what's the objective of that?
It's basically, how do you create an organizational mind like water? How do you create an organization that recognizes tensions as soon as they show up, wherever they show up, and get them resolved as quickly as possible, as low a level as possible?
Mm.
So
That,
there's a number of sort of self-organizing models that have shown up in the last 5 or 10 years. And it's probably one of the most popular.
right.
And it's really about how do you do, like we don't have titles, we just have accountabilities and roles. And
Mm,
those roles are very clear in terms of who's accountable for what. And something shows up out there, there's a fast and easy and quick way to engage with it and not let it lie fallow and then ultimately stink, and take up more room than it should.
never mind the dead body in the back of the office over there. And just curious, like for the listeners out there that are curious and they're looking for different ideas, what type of organization or type of business does this suit, or type of personality does this kind of, method suit, do you think?
uh, Only somebody who owns the business and runs the business is willing to give it up and let the business run itself.
Mm,
So if you still have ego invested in I'm the boss and I make the final decisions and no matter what, as opposed to let the people who really need to make the decisions and are going to make it work do it. So that's a rare breed,
mm,
to find. So it's not for everybody,
yeah.
for anybody, but it's not for everybody because there are not a lot of business owners or boards or stockholders or whatever that are willing to give up their control to let the people who are running the organization and really making the organization work, let them run it and make the decisions about it.
How do you spell that?
HOL HOLOCRACY.
Okay, I'm just looking while we're talking. Hold on one second.
Yeah, the
I
Brian
I
Robertson. Brian Robertson wrote the book. I wrote the foreword to it. So
mm,
if you look that up, you'll see Holocracy One was the company uh,
got it.
that
We're gonna put that
he
in the
built.
show notes. I wanna look at it myself. So
Yeah.
maybe I'll just share a couple things that I take away. I think the first thing that you talked about is the pressure, and one thing you learn when you're in sales is you put pressure on people to say, "Hey, time's running out. Hey, there's only so much left. Oh, gonna increase the price next month," and all of those tactics are sometimes real and sometimes just tactics. And I think your story reminds me that whenever you feel pressure, it's okay to step back, and that there's another train coming, there's another opportunity coming. I think that's um, the first thing that I think of. The second thing from your story that I get is that I know that feeling of just being desperate in some ways. I'm overloaded. I need someone to take care of this. It's really, I can vision how my life's going to be better when that person takes care of it. And when I see that this is such a solution for me, it's so easy to not do the due diligence or to skip the steps because I just so hungry for that outcome. And I think those are the two things that I really take away from it. Is there anything you would add to that?
No, take a breath, relax. You know,
Yeah.
to your point, the opportunities are infinite. You know, and don't think you know that train may be leaving, but there might be a better train coming. And I don't know how you teach yourself to trust that.
Mm,
I don't have an answer for that, Andrew.
yeah.
Come on. I think my wife, who's been one of my best coaches forever, I just said, look, David, you just made the decision too fast. You
Yep.
shouldn't have let yourself be pressured, by that. And there
Mm,
were there were better things coming, and there are other things that you needed to look at and take advantage of and whatever. But
yeah.
to your point, I was up to here,
Yep.
and
Yep.
I said, I need breathing space, and so it seemed like somebody to do it. And it's hard to denigrate the rungs of the ladder that got you where you are. So I love my life. I love my lifestyle. I love what's happened here. So I have to, God bless, the guy that was my wrong call, but I learned a lot in the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
You know, Again, it was expensive, but a lesson well learned.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about the young people out there that are listening to this podcast that are under a lot of stress right now, and they see some opportunity they think is going to relieve that stress, and maybe it will, and maybe it won't. And I want to think about them when I ask you this question, based on what you learned from that story and what you continue to learn, what one action would you recommend our listeners take to avoid suffering the same fate?
Relax, take a breath, and make sure that you're building in some reflective process for yourself and your life.
Mm.
You know, whether that's the weekly review, which I teach in my methodology, or just some sort of a step back and, don't let yourself be, it's like forest management instead of tree hugging. Basically, you need to go up every once in a while and look around the forest to see which tree you need to hug next. The problem is if you're just a tree hugger and the fire lands in your tree, you're dead.
Mm.
As opposed to, wait a minute, let me go up and see that smoke showing up over there, and therefore let me do X, Y, and Z. So some sort of reflection process, some sort of a you could call it strategy, you could call it whatever, but if nothing else, just go pour yourself a good glass of wine and step back and stop and think. I know thinking is one of the toughest things, that people ever have to learn how to do.
That makes me go back to the beginning of our whole conversation. Maybe that's part of the reason why people don't clear their mind, is because if you clear your mind, now you got to think.
And
Well,
you actually have to think to clear your mind. So,
mm,
it works both ways.
yeah,
You actually have to make decisions about the stuff that has your attention, which requires thinking. What is this thing? Should we adopt? Should we get divorced? Should I fix this tooth that hurts? Should we get the puppy,
mm,
for the kids? Should I give the kids karate lessons? All that stuff, those things that bang around in our head that have people's attention, that is basically taking up all that cognitive real estate. There is a way to get rid of it, but you don't get rid of it by drinking or meditating. I know I do both, but you actually have to sit down and think, what does that mean? What I'm going to do about that? Where do I park that? How do I build my personal external brain that I trust, that can keep track of all these multiple levels of commitments I've got with myself in life, and be able to step back and see that from a larger perspective.
yeah, fantastic.
I just said a mouthful, by the way. So
Yeah,
that's a
got a lot to think about. Speaking of thinking, well, last question. What's your number one goal for the next 12 months?
stay alive, uh,
Yeah.
learn Dutch, immigrate to the Netherlands.
Mm,
Big goals there. And, I'm still doing, I'll be 76 this year, Andrew. So, I'm still, but, our mission is to create a world where people perceive problems as projects. So that's, we're barely made a dent in that. So anything I can do to help support the network of trainers and coaches and licensees we've got around the world now delivering this work, and so I'm still doing that. So
yep.
I still continue to do that. I have no big, okay, by the next year we need to make X, Y, Z.
Yep.
By next year, let's stay alive, stay well, and just manage this thing as well as we can. And so that's just an ongoing sort of stylistic, not so much a goal, but just a
Yeah.
stylistic standard, that I have about keeping on.
Yeah.
And like you ask, so I do that. I do 2-3 podcasts a week, and still have. I've
Yeah.
done about 3,000 since 2001.
Amazing.
So I can't stop
Share.
sort of talking about this or sharing it. So
Yeah.
that's it.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, listeners, there you have it. Another story of loss to keep you winning. My number one goal for the next 12 months is to help you, my listener, reduce risk and increase return in your life. To achieve this, I've created our community at myworstinvestmentever.com. I look forward to seeing you there. As we conclude, David, I want to thank you again for coming on the show. And on behalf of A Stotts Academy, my little academy, I hereby award you alumni status for turning your worst investment ever into your best teaching moment. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
No, just relax, stay focused, and be healthy, be safe.
Fantastic. And that's a wrap on another great story to help us create, grow, and protect our wealth. Fellow risk takers, this is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stott, saying, I'll see you on the upside.